Hello, so I'm going to be doing a entry. This is going to be a crossover between LandoLights personality disorder experiences and stories, and then the about the authors. So my viewers keep messaging me because I had mentioned a while back that I was going to make an episode. It's this episode, Boy Interrupted. So this is basically going to be my stories about what it's actually like to be in a psych ward today. We've all seen Girl Interrupted with, what was it, Susanna Kaysen, who went in the 60s, but most people wouldn't know what it's like to be in a psych ward today, I would assume. And I've been in, I don't know, maybe like 11 throughout my life, so I'm gonna try and remember the best stories to tell you, with fake names, obviously, to protect the people that were there, but you meet some colorful characters, that's for sure. So, I think the first psych ward that I was in would have been in Santa Barbara, Cottage Hospital. They call it 5 East there. I went in there a couple times, but I'm trying to think. I think the first time I went through, I know I got in trouble because I was running around. There was a lot of crying people because they were detoxing off of pills. That was like the thing, I don't know, in Santa Barbara, like oxycodons or whatnot. But pretty girls. They were like little Barbies, but they were all detoxing off of pain pills. I guess they were. I don't know what they were doing with them, but I would run around, they're like crying, and I was just like, "Are you okay? I'm here for you," and everything, like trying to be Mr. Savior Boy. And then they pulled me aside and I got in trouble, and they're just like, "You need to stop doing that," and they were like, "You need to focus on your recovery. You're here for a reason. You have problems. Stop trying to help everybody else." But my first, he was pretty cool. He ended up leaving the program. He was in there. I think he was covering off of heroin, but he had some lady come. I think he was like in his early 20s, and then his girlfriend, who was like a lot older, she was like in her late 40s, but came and like were banging in the bathroom, and I remember I had to watch outside the door to make sure they didn't get caught. Let's see, there was another time I was in 5 East. I remember, so when I would go in there, originally I was going in because they didn't know that I had a diagnosis at that time yet. At that time they were just like, "Okay, you're an alcoholic with anxiety and depression." So they would basically pump you full of Valium so you wouldn't have, for those of you who don't know, when you go in for an alcohol detox, alcohol is actually the one drug that can kill you from detoxing. Most people wouldn't know that. You wouldn't die from heroin, cocaine, meth, crack, all that stuff. But alcohol, when you're an alcoholic and you stop drinking, you can actually have seizures, heart attack, all kinds of stuff. So they keep you. Well, at least in Santa Barbara they did, on a steady dose of either some sort of anti-anxiety. In Santa Barbara it was Valium, but there was this guy there. I mean, he seemed like your typical nerdy guy, like sweatpants and glasses, shaved head. I mean, now that I look back on it, I was kind of dumb and naive, but he was following me around and like just anything I'd say, he like would agree with, or he would. I mean, I wasn't there I wasn't really, to think about, but he actually was. And then so later the doctors pulled him aside and said, "Stay away from him." And I was like trying to help him, and I was like, "Oh, he's like, I want to go to the program you're going to be doing this and that." And I was like, "Okay." But they're like, "No, he's he's a antisocial personality disorder." And I was just like, "Oh," I was like, I didn't even really know what that was. They're like, basically, he's not being a real person to you, and he will hurt you for enjoyment. And I was just like, "Oh," and so I was like, "Well, that was like intense." But let's see. After that, I know I went into, there was an outpatient program. That one was called Recovery Road, and that, I guess there was more addicts in there at that time. They were trying me on some of the bipolar medications, but we would go and meet. I don't know, like, it was kind of like a school, like 3 hours a day, 3 days a week. But in there, I remember one lady stood out to me just because I looked at her and I had hoped one day that I was going to be her. She was bipolar. She had her little notebook, and she's like, I stay at home, and I have my emotions and things like that. She's like, but I'm married to my husband, and my husband, he's there for me. And she was like, I know I feel like I'm a problem to him, but he married me, and he loves me, and he's there for me. And I looked at her, and I thought, wow, like I hope when I'm that age, like I really have somebody. Just I hope I convince someone to marry me by that age, so that way when I go completely nuts, that they'll be there and be like, well, I'm sticking by you. But let's see, there was a guy who he was addicted to pain pills, and he was a what was it, military? What do they call that? PTSD. So, but what he would do is he wanted they would say more so, he wanted the pain pills so bad he would go into supposed freak out attacks where he was reliving the war, and he'd be screaming in pain, and then he'd be like, I need pain pills, like, give me pain pills, which kind of drew a suspicion, but they wouldn't give it to him, and so he'd like scream and scream all the time. And there was one girl, she was recovering from crystal meth, I remember, and it was sad though. Like, I mean, I guess she was shooting it up, but she was only like, I don't know, 24, 25, but she looked like she was like 40. Like, her hands were wrinkled, her face was wrinkled, and every time she talked, she like twitched everything, like it's just yeah, no, she ended up relapsing, I remember, because I had to leave the program. So this program, I worked at it was a corporate hotel at the time, and they had told me, you need to stand up for yourself. Your problem is that you just let people push you around and da-da-da-da-da. If you have a problem at work, you stand up and you tell them the problem and you address the situation. I guarantee you'll feel better. Well, at the time, they were staffing one server in the entire restaurant in one food and beverage department between the hours of, I think it was like 11 and 2. So I'd get slammed. I'd literally have 28 tables, and if you have ever been a waiter, like, that is a nightmare. Like, you don't even know what to do. And they kept doing this to me because I would actually somewhat pull it off. I mean, I have to get a lot of things comped, but finally I was like, okay, and I went to my food and beverage director and I said, look, there's a problem here. I knew I shouldn't have done that because of the way, I mean, he was from Africa. He was very like, I run things the way I run things. If you don't like it, this, but I told him, like, and I brought him a stack of all of the comps. And I said, you see all these comps that we've had to do on these tables? I said, we could easily staff a second person for way less of the price, if that. And he looked at me and went, are you trying to tell me how to do my job? And I was like, no. And he's just like, okay. And then I was fired 2 weeks later for some other reason, mysteriously. But I went into the program and I was just like, you know what? I took your advice and I got fired. So I can't finish the school now because I have no insurance. Thanks. And they were like, I was like, you need to be more careful about telling people to just stand up and talk, especially in a work environment. That's not necessarily the place where you want to tell people to just voice their opinion and stand up. Some bosses don't want to hear it and they will fire you. So let's see, what else? Lancaster, California had the worst. Literally, it was awful. I mean, so if you had it, like, for me, suicide attempt, they revive you, or whatever, detox the pills out of your system. And then they either send you on your way, just like, okay, bye, you're all better now, you're not dying, as if, like, there wasn't a problem and you took all these pills. Or they sent me one time it was their idea of a psychological aftercare, and it was literally just rooms with one person at a desk. It was scary. Those are the times when, no matter how bad your life is or suicidal you feel, you're just like, you know what? I feel great. I'm fine. Just get me out of here. So, on to the more exciting stories. So I would say Hawaii had some of the best experiences. I mean, by best I mean memorable. Like, I remember, gosh, when was that? Somewhere in my mid-20s, I was in like a relationship. It was, I guess, it was like on and off for 3 years, and just, there's a lot of ego involved. It was his first relationship, and I just had been scorned so many times. It was ego. But what he decided to do, rather than break up with me, probably because he was scared shitless of me, he waited till I went to visit my mom in Hawaii, and then he cheated, but didn't just cheat. He did something that he would never do with me. I don't want to get too much into it, but just imagine like you have your lover, and then they're like, oh, this is something I never do with anybody, and you're like, okay, I respect your boundary. But then you go on vacation and they're like, oh, by the way, I did that thing with somebody. It was just like, what? Oh, but he knew that I would get mad. He knew that I wasn't going to come back, so I ended up staying in Hawaii, and it was around Christmas time. And I don't know if you've ever been depressed or dumped around Christmas. I swear I get dumped every year around Christmas if I'm in a relationship. It's the weirdest thing. But the worst thing ever is the damn Christmas music and all of that lovey-dovey family blah, and you just got dumped. Like, nothing makes you want to die more. So I ended up in the psych ward, I think, twice. And they're very full during Christmas time for that reason. Most people wouldn't know that, but I remember the first time I went in, I'm not going to say which hospital I went to, but it was one of the ones here in Hawaii. We don't have any really bad. The psychiatric program out here is amazing, I have to say, compared to a lot of the places that I lived. But I remember, so when you go in there, there's two sides. There's like I forget how they call it. It's almost like the grade school and the high school side. But the grade school side's more like for the really need more care and attention, or to be watched, or if you were to go in, like, let's say you did have a suicide attempt or you were suicidal, they'd put you in the heavier watched area before moving you over. You like graduate to the next side where you get to have like cards and like books and things like that. But when you're in the heavy duty area, it's just rooms. I think there's one TV and like chairs in like a main room. But it's, I guess I wouldn't say it's like jail. I've never been to jail really, but it's not enjoyable. I mean, you know what I mean? It's not like Girl Interrupted necessarily. Not in a psych ward in a hospital. You know what I mean? That's like an emergency. You're going in there, emergency. Psychiatrically, you're on a 5150. And what a 5150 means is basically for 3 days you have absolutely no rights, and they're watching you to see if you are capable of being responsible for yourself. And that's what happens when you have a suicide attempt. So I remember I was on the, and it's like the dead side. So they make it super cold, so that way, I don't know, there's something about really cold temperature that keeps you calm or whatnot, And I just remember there was this one girl, and she was there. She was this cute little white girl, country girl, and she was in a blanket. And we were only supposed to be evaluated on that side, I think, for, was it 4 days or something? And then we could move over to like the side where there's windows and sunshine, and it's not ice cold freezing, and we have group meetings, and you know what I mean? You get to be a part of like people, but like on the other side, it was like individual. Just little people sitting in chairs freezing to death, pretty much. To see, I really don't know what they were doing there at that hospital, but I remember the doctor that we had, this guy was like, he, apparently, I found out later he was going through something himself, this doctor, but he was so cut and dry. He'd meet with you for 3 minutes, and he'd be like, okay, you're here for this, okay, this is this, like, okay, alcohol detox, well, then that means, you get this, that, like he didn't even stop to talk to you about your problem while you were there. He just went, textbook says this, which irritated me because I'm like, you know what? I can go home and read my own fucking textbook. Thank you very much. But what really bothered me was there's this really cute, sweet girl that was just, sitting in a blanket, and I was talking to her, and I said, like, how are you okay? And, she's just like, yeah, she's just like, sorry. She's like, I'm 6 months pregnant, and, I've been on this side for almost 2 weeks. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, I don't know what's going on. And I was like, well, what brought you here? And she's like, I was depressed. My husband moved over here in the military, and I didn't have any friends and everything, and I'm pregnant. So, oh my gosh, I was like, don't worry, we'll get you on the other side. And I went, and here I am. I got a mood disorder as it is, so I have no shame. And I went to the doctor, and I told him off, and I said, you know what? And I was just like, I don't understand what your problem is. And I was like, but if you're not going to do your job right, I said, I'm sure there's 10 other interns or people waiting for your job any second now. And I was like, you've got a pregnant girl that's been sitting over here for 2 weeks that you haven't moved over, who's here for depression. She doesn't need to be watched. And I was like, and I'm not just a chapter in your textbook. And I was like, if you want to read the textbook, and I said, then spare me the time. And he goes, I'm one of the doctors, the best doctors ever. You could ask anybody. I said, well, you won't be for long if you keep it up at that. And all the nurses and everybody were just looking at me like, damn, he just told him. And the doctor, he was just, he switched me over to another doctor. But I had all the interns and everybody going, way to go, like, good job. Like, he's been, like, half-assing it here. Like, you want to fill out a complaint for him? Like, they all hated him, but they work underneath him. You know what I mean? But they watched me rip into this doctor. Like, basically got a round of applause. But so then when we moved over to the other side, there's, like, so on the other side, you have, like, one thing I'm notorious for, I've been in the psych ward so many times, and there's nothing that I find. I know when I was in junior high, something that was the funnest thing me and my best friend Daisy used to do is we'd play the game Old Maid. It's the silliest game, but there's something about it. It's so much fun. But every psych ward I've ever been in, to get everybody in a happier mood, I always say, hey, you guys want to play Old Maid? And then we play it, and it's just the excitement you get, like, oh, I got the maid. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's just my thing that I did, but it always worked every single time. So we would play Old Maid, and I mean, you hear stories. A lot of times you start to see the same patterns. There's a lot of times that you'll come across an older woman, maybe I would say it hits her about late 40s, early 50s, who's an alcoholic and has kids, and like it starts to hit her, and I tell this in many different ones, but it's interesting to see that it's a common personality type. But she'll be in there with like a guilt because she wasn't quite there for her kids, because she was drinking, and then it always comes out, she got sexually abused and never told anybody, and it always comes out in the therapy. And even if it doesn't come out right away, I did that when I was in Santa Barbara. I started recognizing, I don't know, I pay attention, I'm an empath, but I'll step forward and say, it happened to me, and it changed me and everything, and then people will step forward, and then you almost form like a little group of other people who it's happened to, and then you like cry together, and then you talk about it, because a lot of them, they've never talked about it before, you know what I mean? And it's also good for them to know that they're not alone. It's also, and it's different. It's not like a doctor can just go up to you and be like, oh, so were you you know what I mean? But when you're a fellow patient, and that's what I would do, I would stand up every time. Well, you can sense it, you just know your own, you know what I mean? But it would feel good because they could tell the story of what happened, and they cry, and then, you know what I mean? Because believe it or not, when that happens to somebody, they hide that so long, and they're so ashamed, because as a kid, you think it's your fault. And it destroys people. Like, they become alcohol. It's just, they end up in these programs, you know what I mean? And that's how I'm glad when I'm there, and I find that, like, so I can be there to be like, you're not alone. You know what I mean? Like, it's not, just, I don't know. I know it's not my there. I go taking care of people again, but you do run into that a lot. But one of my favorite ones is she same personality type, but they took her in, she was drunk, and they had 3 security officers, and she just ran away, tackled them like a what do you call it? A linebacker or something, and they had to sedate her with shots. But booty juice, yeah, that's a thing. So they will inject you in the butt with it. I mean, that's very rare, but I've had it done. If you're freaking out, they inject you with a syringe full of black stuff. I knew what it was. I can't think of what it is right now, but oh boy, do you feel great after that. You're just like, la. It's like antidepressant. No, I'm so sorry. Anti-anxiety, liquefied. I can't remember what the name of it is, but yeah. So I mean, because a lot of times we're upset, we're emotionally unstable. That's why we're in the hospital. So they have to shoot you with a needle. But trying to think. Oh, one of the saddest ones I ever saw. So one time I met there's this Asian lady, and she had like bruises all across her neck, and her eyes had bruises underneath, and her story was that she had tried to hang herself, and she actually, so she worked as a detective in homicide, and yeah, so she was a detective in homicide, but she had seen so much death and violence and investigated, you know what I mean? It caught up to her one day, and she couldn't handle it. She couldn't handle the world, you know what I mean? So she tried to hang herself, and unfortunately her husband walked in and caught her in time, and she was like, I felt so bad for her, because you had to understand, like, not only she was overwhelmed, yes, and she wanted to die, but now she lived, and she had to live with the fact that she tried to kill herself. She had to face her husband. Like, this poor woman, my heart went out to her. I felt so bad. And, you know, she had the bruises, and it's like, gosh, because, you know, when you make that decision, you typically, you don't expect to be there the next day and have to deal with that on top of all the problems you had when you chose to do that, you know what I mean? But let's see what else. I'm trying to think. So I'm going hospital by hospital. So I think that's all of that hospital. Then we'll go to the next one. It's just my favorite, just because it was the greatest. So okay, so I went into that hospital first during that time when that ex had done that to me. So then I went into another one, which I'll just go ahead and say, because they don't take adults anymore. Now it's only children, but it was Kāhi, Mohala. And that one was actually pretty cool, because they had a swimming pool, and we had like a cafeteria, which was kind of cool. So we all went and ate like a lunch thing. But I'll never forget. So I'm in there and I'm like crying and like just sad. Like I just wanted to die, you know, because I felt awful, you know. I couldn't believe that the person that I loved so much would go that far, you know. And I would call him on my, you know, visitation phone times. But there was this one girl, she was a local girl, and she's actually quite well known on the island. She's done a full recovery. I won't say her name, but she was known definitely in the newspapers, because we'll just leave it that way. But she was in there because I think she was partying, I think, with like methamphetamines, but her boyfriend had knocked her over the head with a freaking steel pipe, and they had to staple her head shut. But she was just the funniest. Like, she had me laughing so much, because her pants were too big, so they were always falling down, so her butt crack was always hanging out. She had come up to me and she was just like, hey boy, and I was like, yeah. She's like, you're gay, right? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, you want to see something cool I can do? And I was like, okay. She's like, I had 2 twin babies, 10 pounds each. I said, what? She's like, yeah, 2 twins, 10 pounds each. She's like, but check out what I can do now. And she slipped down in her chair, opened her legs, and she was like, she was just like making fart noises out of her. She was queefing like crazy, and I was just like, oh my god. But I was laughing so hard, and then the security walked by like, hey, you better knock that off. And then we'd play Old Maid. I played again Old Maid, but she would always call it the Old Queen. She's like, you're the Old Queen. But it was funny, because she was just like, she looked at me and she's like, what are you doing here? She's like, you know, you're intelligent, you're good looking, like, you know, what are you so sad about? Like, and I was just like, I told her this story, you know, my boyfriend, he cheated on me, and he did this and that. And she goes, your boyfriend cheated on you and fucked you over, and you're in the crazy house? And I was just like, yeah. And she's like, she's like, you're gonna get better, get yourself back there, and you go kick his motherfucking ass. And I thought about it and went, you're absolutely right. Here I am crying in the psych ward when I could be making his life a miserable hell. I know, disordered way of thinking, but it made me feel better. It was like that moment, if you've ever seen Death Becomes Her, when she's just like, you've got to eliminate, she goes, you're absolutely right. And then she gets out of the psych ward, and she goes, with a plan. But yeah, no, it was funny. We were swimming one time, and the old lady, there's one of these old ladies, I don't even know why she was there, but she ran for it, and it was so funny, and she's like, I don't know why it was funny. It was just this really old lady, like, you know, run, Forrest, run, or just running across the field. I don't know where she would run to. We're in the psych ward, you know, so. Let's see. Actually, you know what? And at Kāhi, Mohala, it was where I had the same doctor. I forget her name, but she's Russian. She's a really smart doctor. She was finally the one who diagnosed me with borderline personality disorder. Like, they didn't, when you don't know that's what's wrong, it is quite a ride. It is very, you don't fit in. You're doing weird things and you don't know why. And for somebody to hand you a booklet that says, this is what a borderline is, and to see everything you're doing as something that exists, do you know what I mean? Imagine taking those symptoms and never putting them together and just applying them in the society. You're just like, in your mind, you have this long list of these are all the things wrong with me, but when someone's telling you it's a diagnosis, it's a disorder, you know what I mean? It's their way of saying, like, you're normal for what you are. I felt so much better because I was like, you mean I'm not the only one? I'm not just batshit crazy and doing like crazy things for no reason. She's like, no, you're absolutely normal for what you are. And she said, and the best part about it is it's treatable. And I was like, oh, I started crying. I was so happy because all I knew is that I was doing these things. I didn't know why. And, I kept losing everybody around me. I couldn't keep my friends. I couldn't keep my lovers, so I just expected everybody to always leave. And it was awful. But for the first time, I had a diagnosis. I had something to research and, treatment options and all of these things. But let's see. So the next hospital after that would be... I think I did okay for a while. I mean, I lived in Lancaster again. I ended up going back to California and then stuff, but I think so. The most recent one would be, and that was actually the one that really, really changed my life. It was the most intense. The other ones were like, I don't know, 1 week stay of, hospital, but I'd reached a point when I was, 30, and first my aunt died. And I was really close to her. She died because she had a kidney transplant. And then my grandfather died. And then I was like, okay. And then my brother died. And then I was really like, what the hell? Like, I couldn't handle, it was my brother. And what sucked is we'd only had so much time together as it was because we grew up with our mom separately. But I was like devastated and then arguing with my sister because my sister was just dramatic and very narcissistic. My brother died and she had to make it about her, you know what I mean, kind of thing. So but anyways, and then so she ended up dying because she killed herself. She hung herself. So after what was it, like within a year, like I started to go like, wait, is this real? Like, how could to lose your brother and sister within a year, like you really start to like, I don't know, I lost it. I kind of checked out, on top of just being borderline in the regular world. I mean, and then with these things happening, I was drinking more and I started getting suicidal and I wanted to die, and it was like, it was just an awful time in my life. But finally I ended up, going in for help. And so Queens offered a program. It was a brand new program and I was one of the first people to try it. It was what do they call it? The Kāhi Uka house, I think, or something. But basically, it's there was one house in the front which had 3 rooms, a kitchen, and a living room, and then there was one in the middle, the same, and then one in the back, which is the same. So the front one was the boys' house, the middle one was the girls' house, and it was basically designed for people with psychiatric disorders who didn't have anywhere to live or go at the time, and so this would have been when, so we would live there, and then we also went to school. So I think it was like 3-4 days a week. So it was full, what do you call it, watched, I guess, you know what I mean? Because when we weren't there was a bus or a van that took us to school. We all went to school together, and then when we came back from the school, we all lived in the house together, and then I don't want to say taught us how to to be human again, you know what I mean? But we lived amongst each other, and see, that was the real challenge. So we're all disordered here, you know what I mean? My roommate was antisocial personality disorder, and then we had across the hallway there's depressive disorder, another bipolar borderline, and then what else did we have? We had narcissistic personality disorder, but he definitely wasn't diagnosed that, but you could tell he was. And then who else did we have? Oh, and then we had a schizophrenic in the house. That was fun. Again, I always got everybody to play cards. It was fun, but it was interesting because so this to me I thought would be a very interesting story to tell. So if you were to put in a house an antisocial personality disorder, a borderline personality disorder, bipolar, a schizophrenic, a narcissist, and a depressive disorder, who do you think would actually be running the house? And this is why I have to laugh at Sasha Sloan. I don't know if you've ever checked out her YouTube, but again, this woman, she's got it spot on. You bet your ass, it was the borderline running the house. And you know what? I'm a skinny gay guy, but it just, when it comes down to personality disorders, there's just something about us that we eat them all. I mean, I did it on purpose. I'm kind, I have empathy. I remember when I first got there, Mr. Antisocial Personality Disorder, he directly, automatically, what's your diagnosis? Like, wanted to, like, go back and forth. And, like, I was sitting on the couch, and he was sitting next to me, and he had his butt facing me, and he farted at me, right? As if I was supposed to be offended, and I turned around, and I whacked my butt up, and I just farted even louder at him, and everybody started laughing, and I was just like, you want to play? Or really, what everybody was afraid of me was, I left my sunglasses on the table one day, and so, I guess there's something in my mind where I was just kind of like, I'm not taking shit from anybody, especially here, because, just I'm not. I don't know. It's my own problem, but my sunglasses disappeared. And the antisocial personality guy had asked me to borrow them the day before, and I said no, because I don't want him borrowing my stuff. You know what I mean? But one of them borrowed it, and I was livid, and I was like, those sunglasses better come back here. This is not cool. And I was like in the office going off, and I was like, people do not take people's stuff. I was like, this is how it's gonna go. And I was just like, roar, in therapy and everything. And it was interesting because you got to see it in action too, how people with antisocial personality disorder or narcissism, they'll go and they'll talk shit about you, you know what I mean, beforehand, or, you know what I mean, it's, what is that called, campaign smearing or whatnot. So when we went to school, he had already run up and was like telling like the teachers that I was going off about my sunglasses or this or that, you know what I mean. And so when we sat down and everything, and they were like trying to act like he didn't, I just called it out for what it was, and I was just like, first of all, yes, I'll call it out. You know what I mean? And I called out everybody for the thing. It's like, we don't need to go run around doing it this way. If you got something to say, then say it. I was just like, and I explained the whole scenario, what was going on and everything, and I made my point. But I was just like, I am not afraid to stand up and speak. But let's see what else. So the bipolar borderline, so he had, I guess I wasn't, they didn't tell me I was diagnosed bipolar yet at that time, but so he had my same diagnosis, but his addiction was inhaling cans, like, spray aerosol cans. And so when he would relapse, he would lock himself in a room, and then you hear this, he was a big boy, and he would kadunk, kadunk, you know what I mean? Like, you would hear his body, like, flopping. I guess it was his way of suicide attempt. I don't know. I mean, because after a while, we were allowed to leave the house for, I think, a couple hours a day to try and be part of society. They would drug test us and everything, though, regularly. But I think everybody kind of did something. I know that the antisocial personality guy, and see, what's funny is and that's when I look at antisocial personality disorder, he was only a product of his, because we ended up talking, he's actually a Cancer, which he had a heart, but it was just so jaded. And he was living in like the tents, like the homeless, like doing methamphetamines, and he had no teeth. All his teeth were gone. But he was always asking questions, almost to see what the normal answer would be, you know what I mean? And then when you earned his respect or put him in his place or of a value, like he looks at me like I was a good person to ask questions, if that makes sense. Like, as I always had some sort of answer, but but see, he would use that. See, and that was the antisocial personality side of him. He would use that to try to, well, I mean, he was trying to, what would you call that, bond, I guess, But he would ask me stupid things like, so what do you think? This girl and this and that. And yeah, there's always some girl that he was lusting after or texting, you know what I mean? So he had that sexual quality thing where he was like, you think she wants to bang? Da, 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 you know, so he had the sex side to him. He had the feisty side. He had the dominant thing where he would be like, I've glued this sink, 5 times, and somebody keeps turning it on, but I'm just a fucking bitch. When you come say it to me, I was just like, well, then why don't you put a sign on it instead of yelling about it? That's why I ran the house. But, but yeah, he was always, trying to be important or things like that. Or he would do things to irritate, like he would turn up the music loud at night when he knew that the lady was coming, because then the lady would yell. But it was weird because he would almost do it so he could show how sorry he was. Does that make sense? It was interesting because I could watch this as it was happening, you know what I mean? It was calculated. Everything was calculated. But in my opinion, and that's my opinion with antisocial personality disorder, they have calculated everything the way they do, and you suspect they are, because they didn't learn to do things naturally. Does that make sense? Their parents were disordered. So when you're disordered, no matter which one you have, and you go out into the regular world, there's something different about you. You know what I mean? So that actually, I'll get into another video. There's a thing called mirroring, but people automatically, and I hate that about doctors these days, they teach you to be afraid of these people. They're disordered. They're not monsters. They can be monsters when they're triggered or they're afraid or they think, you know what I mean, they need to defend themselves. Other than that, they're broken on the inside. What makes you think they're gonna, you know what I mean? They're not monsters. They want you to think they're monsters. And but doctors teach you to be afraid, like they're doing it for this purpose. They're doing it because they don't understand. Do you know what I mean? Mirroring. Sorry, this is what I was trying to explain. They mirror you because they don't know how to act. Does that make sense? Or if not just that, they would learn from their disordered parent that mirroring their parent made them happy. Does that make sense? I know. Yeah, I'll get into that into another video. Let's continue on with that. So that was the antisocial personality guy. I mean, we were friends. I had his respect, And then, anytime anybody else tried to fight with me, he'd stand up and be like, "Oh no, you're not fighting with him." And I kind of liked that. That was a nice thing. And so, the bipolar, borderline, he would cry a lot. I mean, we ended up actually going on to the YMCA together later on, and he just was sucking cans like crazy. But he was running away from his wife and his kids. He had 5 kids and a wife on another island, and he just did not feel worthy. So he wanted to run away, and he was running away. Well, he wanted to die, really, but it was sad, but I think what it was, in my opinion, is, here I am being clinical, but hey, that's what I'm here for, but he was one of those kind of people, because he was so sensitive. He married a wife who was very controlling. You know what I mean? So he was always, because of his low self-esteem and self-worth, he always felt like he had to do things to make people happy. He, in his own words, he said, I show love by giving service. I do things for people. But he got so caught up and into that as his life, that being suicidal and, you know what I mean, doing what he was doing became his only time for him. So he almost set himself down a dark path, and then the worst part was he felt awful about it. He would cry every time he would talk to his wife, and they missed him and stuff. It was just, I've been there, trust me. It's weird. I don't know. It's you keep doing negative things because you've done something negative. You know what I mean? It becomes a whole thing. You literally, for me, I have to, what I always did, this is the solution, I had to move and start over. Pretend I was completely somebody else with a fresh reputation. It only lasted so long, but it got me out of that. Once everybody knew who I was and I felt awful about myself, I wanted to die, like, yeah. So then there was Schizophrenic. Oh my gosh, he was a really cool guy. He was a really sweet boy. He was about 18 years old, and he would be sitting there, and then he'd just smile real big and be like, "Oh," or he'd just like talk to himself like little things. He almost seemed like somebody who was like perma-fried, like off of drugs, but he was intelligent though, and that was what was interesting. Is they observe things that you normal people wouldn't catch. Like someone with like a schizophrenia, they can almost like sense when someone's lying, or they see the weirdest things. And if you're nice to them and you don't make them feel weird and they open up to you, you'll hear what they're thinking and stuff. I mean, it's interesting because with the doctor, you're with a doctor, so it's like I don't know, it's different. But when you're like living in a home, like a boys' home with them, you can be their friend. You know what I mean? They'll see you differently. And so like he opened up to me and was talking to me, and like I felt really bad because I did end up seeing him after I left the program. He went into the YMCA too, I think. But basically we all got kicked out. All of us relapsed. I would have a beer at the cemetery, smoke a little weed, but apparently she got really mad because when I got caught months into it, she was just like, there was weed in your stuff, and I was like, was that the first time? And she was like, what? And I was like, oops, wrong answer. But we all got kicked out, and I didn't say his name, I hope, the schizophrenic boy, and it he was aware that he was schizophrenic. You know what I mean? Like, the beautiful part about being crazy usually is that you don't know. You know what I mean? Or realize that you're crazy, sort of. But he was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, like how to get a job or if I can hold a job. And I mean, I gave him the best answers I could. I said, I said, play a part. You know what I mean? When you're around people, there's nothing wrong with what you're thinking, but remember, you've got to pretend to be somebody else. So I made it like, just play normal. I mean, really, what else can you do when you're schizophrenic? I mean, don't beat yourself up for who you are. That's who you are. He's taking his medication, and he didn't ask to be like that. And I was like, and then that's what I told him too. I said, but look around before you speak and see what everybody's saying, and how they're acting, and then and here's a perfect example of what I mean by mirroring. Mirror that. So here's a perfect example of me actually borderline teaching a schizophrenic to mirror people. Because if he was to be himself, he wouldn't, it wouldn't go well for him, so... So then there was the depressive boy. Oh my gosh. So he was actually kind of handsome. And he knew that, at first, I saw, I'm not very, what's the word, shy about like, oh, you're cute, but he enjoyed the attention. You could tell his parent was a narcissist, definitely. I mean, that's what he was always complaining about. It like drove him crazy. That's probably why he had such bad depressive disorder. But when you're abused by a narcissist, it messes with you a certain way where you actually have narcissistic qualities. But his thing was he was suicidal. So he had like slashes all down his arms, like just from like full on taking knives and cutting them up. And so there was actually, he started sneaking in bottles of booze, which was really brave, to just bring the booze into the house, but to drink. And of course, my dumb ass, we actually were roommates for a second, and I was like, ooh, good boy, But yeah, that's the borderline side of me, like, ooh, But we were drinking, I guess, and I was hiding mine in coffee so there wouldn't be a scent. But I ended up blacking out. But then I woke up and I was in the back house. I was in trouble. The counselor came to talk to me. He was like, do you know what you did last night? And I was like, no, I don't want to know. And I was like sitting there. I just felt awful. I was like, oh my god, like I blacked out. I couldn't remember anything. They're like, you ripped all of the screens off the windows. You knocked the freaking, or you, they're like the aide, the lady that was watching us. I knocked her into a barbecue. They had to like tie me down, and I didn't know the story. I didn't know what had happened, so I felt awful, and I thought everybody hated me, you know. And then I had to go into school, and I was just like sitting there like trying to keep like a I don't care face, you know. And then like I just started crying. But it was interesting because the counselors knew that I didn't know what happened, and they actually already knew what had happened. And for some reason everybody was instructed not to tell me what happened because they wanted to do this in therapy. But and I thought, and they said that I attacked the suicidal boy that I was a roommate with, you know what I mean, the depressive boy. And I thought, oh my god, what did I do, you know? And so I was like crying in the session, and they're just like, do you want to know what you did last night, Landon? And I was just like, okay. And they're just like, and then they looked at the depressive boy, and they're just like, why didn't you tell him? And he said, you saved my life. And I was like, what? And he's just like, I tried to kill myself again. And he said, and you beat the shit out of me. He said, and you talked sense to me, but then you lost it. And you started screaming, and you said, why does everybody around me die? Why is everybody dying around me? And you started ripping the screens off the windows, and you were screaming, crying because you were in so much pain. And they tried to hold you down, and you knocked somebody into the barbecue. And I was like, really? And they're just like, yeah, it wasn't you, Landon. You were okay. And I was like, whoa. I was like, because I just thought I must have messed everything up. But they were like, no, you responded. And then, well, of course, we all got in trouble for drinking. But I guess that was what had happened. And so I felt better because like I was so ashamed. You know what I mean? They put me in the back house, and I was just like, oh, I was hating my life. Like, but yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any other interesting stories. The narcissist guy, he was just had to watch his news, had to have the certain volume, and he was a crybaby. He would whine about every little thing and tittle tattle, and then, of course, when he got out of the program, he's doing so much better now, and everything's just so great. And it was just like, oh my god, you're so full of it. I ran into him one day, and he just gave me the nastiest look, and I was just like, yeah, you look happy. But yeah, that program I did, it changed me. I don't know why. I don't know if it was the medications that finally started working. And the whole reason I went into the whole thing was because I was crying, you know, I was upset, and the most handsome redheaded doctor, he was an intern, came and he hugged me, and he was just like, I'm here for you. And I was like, okay. So he told me to take a pill. I took a pill. He told me to go to, and I'm grateful for it. He knew too, with my diagnosis, like, and I used to have, he was a big crush. Typical borderline behavior. If you ever seen the movie The Crush, remember in the end she's got a crush on her doctor. But yeah, I got back on my feet, and we won't ever talk about the YMCA, but after I got out of there, my life turned around for a good time. I mean, I got over I became a recovered borderline and a bipolar in remission through Queen's Medical Center's programs. So it is successful. It is efficient. Yeah. I'd like to throw that out there, but I hope that gives you somewhat of an idea of what psych wards are like today. Alright, have a good one. Don't forget the like button. Subscribe!